What is the mechanism used by R when performing all these import and export operations? The mechanism relies on something called connections or connection objects. These are a special type of objects in R. It's non-standard objects, nothing like a vector or a list or a data frame. It's something more abstract, a little bit esoteric. They actually correspond to reference to data streams, technically speaking. And there are associated functions. The most common function is the file function. It's again, the most common function that allows you to create or to describe, allows you to create what is called a connection object. And think of connection objects, think of the idea, the term connection as some sort of construct or some sort of mechanism used by R, again, to establish what it is, a connection to external media. This type of functions, a file is not the only one. Other common ones are the URL function, so that you can directly pass a web address. There are the pipe function. This is another common one. There is the FIFO function. So some of these guys are less common functions. They all allow you to create connections. The most common one, again, as I said, is the file connection, which, as you may imagine, it allows you to establish a connection with an external file. Now, every time you use these connection functions, what they do is they only create a connection. When I say they only create a connection, it means that they establish a connection, but they don't necessarily open or close the connection. They're just going to create a connection. You also have an argument open, and the argument open, you can specify, for example, a character W. So this will mean that you create a connection and you're going to open the connection in writing mode. You could also specify R, which, as you might guess, this allows you to establish a connection, in this case to an external file, and you're going to read information from that file, or combinations of these. So these are the most common ones. You could look at the help documentation and find more about these guys here. Typically, you don't need to explicitly call these guys. You can if you want. So here's an example. So I'm going to start by creating an out file object. For this, I'm going to use the file function. And let's say I'm going to export output to a file called example.txt. And because I'm going to be writing things, the argument open, I'm going to define it in W mode, in writing mode. And then what I'm going to do is use the concatenate function. So the cat function, one line of text, title line, for example, another line, let me call it subtitle, and then more text, that's going to be our third ingredient. All of these, I'm going to be separating these guys with a new line character, and the value for the file argument, it's going to be my out file object. Okay. And then let's say I decide to concatenate one more line of text. Let me append a line separator at the end. And again, I want all of these to be directed to the out file object. The last thing would be to close the connection with the close function. Here we have it. So here's the example. Again, first, I start creating a connection. This is the first step. Then I include all the code to export text to that output file. And then because the way I created the connection, I actually created in writing mode. At the end, when I'm done writing my code, what I need to do is close the connection with the close function. This is the mechanism that R uses when every time you're using functions such as the read.table, or in this particular example, it's actually, this corresponds more to a writing.table scenario. Every time you are using also the sync function to divert output, or when you are using the all the functions that we've seen so far, the source function, the load function, the save function, all those functions that allow you to import and export things. All of these guys under the hood, implicitly, they are actually taking care of creating the connection, whether it's in writing mode or in reading mode, or maybe a combination of both. And they also will handle for you the closing part of the connection. So this is why you don't actually need to explicitly, manually specify or use all of these connection functions. They do exist. This is the actual mechanism that R uses to working with external media. If you check out the documentation, you will find many more examples. You will find many more files. Interestingly, some of these connections, they actually have to do with zipped files. So if you have a directory of a file that is compressed, there are associated connections that allow you to decompress those type of files. And again, they're gonna be related with the notion, the idea of a connection object. The last part I want to talk about is mentioning some of the main functions available in R. R comes fully equipped with common functions to handle files. And again, here's just, it's a non-exhaustive table, but it actually contains the main ones. So the first one, we've already talked about this, getW. It allows you to display the current working directory. You have the dir, the directory function. It lists all the files in whatever directory you specify. You can also change or set a different working directory with the setwd function. Then you have the dir.create. This allows you to create new directory. And then you have a bunch of file functions, file.create, file.remove, file.append, file.rename, file.copy, and file.exist. And typically the name tells you, well, if you want to create a file, if you want to delete or remove a file, if you want to try to append two files, if you want to rename a file, if you want to copy a file, or if you want to check if a file already exists in a specified directory. You actually have a lot of functionality to work with files as well as directories in your computer from within R. And this actually makes R really, really powerful in terms of allowing you to work with all sorts of input scenarios as well as all sorts of output export scenarios without having the need to go outside the session in R. Everything can be handled within whatever session you are working with.